In early April 2025, a seismic shift occurred in the icy expanse of Greenland, reverberating through the corridors of power in Washington, Copenhagen, and Nuuk. Colonel Susannah Meyers, the commanding officer of the U.S. Pituffik Space Base in northwestern Greenland, was abruptly relieved of her duties. The official reason cited was a loss of confidence in her leadership. However, insiders revealed that the true cause was her alleged undermining of Vice President JD Vance's criticisms of Denmark during his recent visit to the base. This incident was not an isolated event but rather a culmination of escalating tensions between the United States and Denmark over the strategic Arctic territory of Greenland. The Trump administration, with Vice President Vance at the forefront, had been increasingly vocal about Denmark's purported neglect of Greenland's security and development. Vance's visit to the Pituffik base was marked by sharp criticisms of Denmark's role in Greenland, suggesting that the U.S. should assume greater responsibility for the island's security. Colonel Meyers, a respected officer with a distinguished career, found herself at the center of this geopolitical storm. In an internal communication, she emphasized the importance of unity among American, Canadian, Danish, and Greenlandic personnel, subtly countering Vance's divisive rhetoric. This stance was perceived by the Pentagon as a challenge to the administration's agenda, leading to her dismissal. The fallout from Meyers' removal was immediate and far-reaching. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen condemned the U.S. actions as unacceptable pressure on Greenland, highlighting the delicate balance of autonomy and sovereignty that defines the island's relationship with Denmark. Greenland's own leadership expressed concern over becoming pawns in a larger geopolitical game, with newly formed coalitions emphasizing the island's right to self-determination. As the Arctic's strategic importance grows amidst global climate change and shifting power dynamics, the events surrounding Colonel Meyers' dismissal underscore the complex interplay of military strategy, international diplomacy, and the aspirations of indigenous populations. The world watches closely as the U.S., Denmark, and Greenland navigate this intricate web of interests and identities. Vice President JD Vance's trip to Greenland was anything but routine. The visit came at a time when the United States was doubling down on its military and strategic interests in the Arctic. Climate change had opened new sea routes, and untapped natural resources made the region a fresh battleground, not just for environmental scientists, but for military planners and political hawks in Washington. Vance arrived at Pituffik Space Base, the former Thule Air Base, with a clear agenda to project strength and question Denmark's stewardship over Greenland. In front of cameras and foreign dignitaries, he declared, "For too long, the Arctic has been an afterthought. We cannot allow Europe or any other actor to neglect this region while expecting American forces to bear the brunt of its defense." The statement sent a chill far colder than the Greenlandic winds through diplomatic circles. His assertion that Denmark had underinvested in Greenland and taken U.S. presence there for granted was widely interpreted as an attempt to signal a possible shift in U.S. foreign policy. Behind closed doors, Vance reportedly suggested that the U.S. explore options to establish more direct ties with Greenland's government, bypassing Denmark altogether. This was not the first time Greenland had been at the center of American strategic ambition. In 2019, President Donald Trump had floated the idea of buying Greenland from Denmark, an offer that was laughed off by Danish leaders but nonetheless revealed Washington's growing interest in the icy island. Fast forward to 2025, and that interest had evolved into a full-court press. Colonel Susannah Meyers, in her role as commander of the base, was expected to host the vice president and manage the optics of the visit. But what followed would shape her legacy and cost her career. During a briefing attended by Danish, Canadian, and Greenlandic officials, Meyers reportedly pushed back against Vance's criticisms. According to leaked meeting minutes, she had said, "Security here is a team effort. We owe our mission success not to isolationist thinking, but to collaboration with our Danish and Greenlandic partners." That single comment, though diplomatically phrased, struck a nerve. It was seen as an implicit rebuke to Vance's assertion that Denmark was failing to hold up its end of the bargain. Within days of the vice president's departure, a directive came from Washington. Meyers was to be relieved of her command, effective immediately. The official statement cited operational reassignment, but insiders confirmed that her removal was directly tied to her perceived insubordination during the high-level visit. Meyers' sudden dismissal sent shockwaves through the ranks. She had served with distinction for over 2 decades, including tours in Afghanistan and senior roles in NORAD. Her peers were stunned. Some suspected that the move was politically motivated, a way to send a message to anyone in the military who might publicly question the Trump-Vance administration's approach to foreign policy. Meanwhile, Vice President Vance doubled down. In a Fox News interview, he stated, "We cannot have military leaders contradicting our strategic priorities abroad. That's not how a chain of command works." The message was clear: loyalty to the administration's narrative was paramount. But Meyers wasn't the only one questioning Vance's vision for Greenland. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, during a fiery press conference in Copenhagen, accused the U.S. of meddling in internal Arctic affairs. Greenland is not a U.S. territory. It belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark, and our relationship with the people of Greenland is not up for negotiation in Washington. Greenlandic politicians also chimed in. Some expressed sympathy for Meyers, noting her long-standing support for local communities. Others were alarmed at what they saw as a power play by the U.S. to sow division between Nuuk and Copenhagen. As public opinion in Greenland shifted, new questions emerged. Was the U.S. trying to sideline Denmark to secure an Arctic foothold? Was Greenland's autonomy being manipulated for superpower chess games? And what would Meyers do now that she was off the front lines? Colonel Susannah Meyers' dismissal became more than just a personnel shuffle. It ignited a long smoldering conversation across Greenland about identity, independence, and influence. The very next week after the vice president's controversial visit and Meyers' departure, a coalition of Greenlandic political parties convened an emergency summit in Nuuk. Though officially labeled a strategic roundtable, its true intent was unmistakable: to assess the future of Greenland's relationship not just with Denmark but also with the United States. The largest party, Inuit Ataqatigiit, which had long advocated for full independence from Denmark, seized the moment. Party leader Mute Borup Egede declared, "We must not allow ourselves to become pawns in the geopolitical games of great powers. Greenland is not a prize to be won, but a land with its own voice and its own destiny." While some interpreted Egede's words as directed toward Denmark, many understood the real message was aimed at Washington. Support for Egede's position surged among younger Greenlanders. On TikTok and Instagram, hashtags like #NotYourBase, #GreenlandForGreenlanders, and #HandsOffNuuk began trending, accompanied by dramatic drone footage of the icy fjords and colorful villages, juxtaposed with American military hardware. Meanwhile, U.S. media outlets began to dig into Colonel Meyers' record. Profiles in The Atlantic and The New York Times painted her as a moderate, pragmatic officer who had repeatedly advocated for cultural exchange and humanitarian missions in Greenland. One anonymous source described her as the closest thing to an ambassador Greenland ever had. In fact, several tribal leaders from northern settlements released statements praising her efforts to bring healthcare services, food security aid, and even science education outreach to remote Inuit communities. These weren't just gestures, they were signs of trust. So, when she was fired for merely promoting unity among partners, many saw it not only as unfair, but as proof that the Trump-Vance administration was prioritizing its political narrative over genuine diplomacy. In response, thousands of Greenlanders marched peacefully in Nuuk, waving signs that read, "We choose collaboration, not occupation. Thank you, Colonel Meyers. Greenland is not for sale." Even the Danish monarch, Queen Margrethe II, broke royal protocol and issued a rare statement of concern. "The kingdom must proceed with dignity and respect in all international matters. I urge our allies to reflect on the values we share." Back in Washington, however, the administration stood firm. JD Vance used the controversy to bolster his image among the GOP base, framing it as a stand for military discipline and strategic dominance. During a town hall event in Ohio, he said, "Greenland is the future of Arctic security, and America won't sit back while Europe plays bureaucratic games. We need commanders who understand that." But the backlash had begun to seep into the military ranks. Quietly, several senior officers at the Pentagon voiced discomfort with how the situation had been handled. General Rebecca Owens, chair of the Joint Chiefs, reportedly expressed concern in a closed-door meeting that the decision to fire Meyers could create a chilling effect on field commanders, discouraging honesty and encouraging political posturing. The concern was real. If senior officers couldn't speak the truth about conditions on the ground without risking their careers, could the chain of command still function as a meritocracy? Meanwhile, Meyers herself maintained a dignified silence. Retired but not forgotten, she refused media interviews. But her publicist released a brief statement. Colonel Meyers served the Constitution, the mission, and her people with honor. She will always stand for unity, respect, and truth. Her words resonated deeply, not just in Greenland, but in living rooms across America, where military families and veterans debated the meaning of duty, politics, and integrity. As the world turned its gaze northward, the question was no longer just about Greenland. It was about what kind of superpower the United States wanted to be. As the media storm intensified and political fallout reached Washington, the Arctic transformed from a frozen frontier into the newest theater of American ideological struggle. With Colonel Meyers sidelined, the Pentagon hastily installed her replacement, Brigadier General Darren Coates, a hardline loyalist known for his uncompromising stance on chain-of-command protocols. His arrival at Pituffik Space Base was less than warmly received by both international allies and base personnel, many of whom quietly viewed him as a political appointee sent to clean house. General Coates wasted no time reasserting U.S. priorities. In his inaugural briefing, he emphasized, "We are here to assert American dominance in this region. Allies are welcome, but we will not apologize for leading." Those words echoed across news broadcasts, drew sharp criticism. Danish newspapers ran scathing headlines. American hubris in the high north. Pituffik or Pentagon? Greenland, a pawn in a new Cold War. Meanwhile, back home, JD Vance was leveraging the controversy to galvanize support for a broader military doctrine. In a rousing address at the Conservative Leadership Conference, he proposed the Arctic Sovereignty Initiative, a plan to dramatically expand U.S. military presence in the Arctic, including new satellite tracking systems, a deep-sea port in Greenland, and prepositioned missile defense systems. He framed it as the 21st century version of NATO's Northern Shield, but critics saw it differently. Senator Tammy Duckworth, Democrat Illinois, herself a combat veteran, took to the Senate floor to respond. "What we're witnessing is not strategy, it's stagecraft. Firing a decorated officer for defending cooperation is not strength, it's weakness masquerading as discipline." Within hours, a bipartisan group of senators introduced a resolution demanding an independent investigation into Meyers' removal, citing concerns over political interference in military command decisions. Public opinion began to split. A Reuters Ipsos poll showed that while 54% of Republicans supported the decision to remove Meyers, 67% of independents and 81% of Democrats opposed it. Among military families, support for the vice president's Arctic stance had declined sharply from 48% approval down to 32% in just 1 week. Talk radio, cable news, and online forums lit up with debate. Was this a necessary realignment in a volatile world? Or the first sign of a dangerous politicization of America's armed forces? But far beyond Capitol Hill and media studios, in a quiet suburb of Annapolis, Maryland, Colonel Meyers broke her silence. Appearing on the veteran-hosted podcast Silent Service, she spoke calmly but firmly. "I was asked to host a visit, not recite a script. My duty was to tell the truth about our partnerships on the ground, and I did just that. If that costs me my career, so be it. But I will not pretend that we can succeed in Greenland without respecting those who live there." The episode went viral, reaching over 10 million downloads in 48 hours. Hashtags like #StandWithMyers, #ArcticTruth, and #DutyFirst began trending across platforms. In Greenland, her words were translated and replayed on national TV. Community leaders issued statements reaffirming their respect for the former commander. One village, Konanak, home to some of the closest Inuit communities near the base, went a step further. They named their new youth science center the Meyers Institute for Polar Peace. It was a symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. As the United Nations Arctic Council prepared for an emergency session to address the escalating tensions, rumors began swirling that China and Russia were observing the situation with interest, even offering to host separate talks with Greenlandic leaders about future investment opportunities. What had started as a dismissal was snowballing into a full-blown geopolitical reordering. Lines were being drawn, and ice, no matter how frozen, has a way of cracking under pressure. As snow swept across the icy runways of Pituffik Space Base, a quiet but profound change was settling over the Arctic region. The firing of Colonel Susannah Meyers, once seen as a routine chain-of-command action, had spiraled into a defining moment not just for Greenland but for America's role in a shifting world. In Washington, the pressure cooker reached a boiling point. The bipartisan Senate resolution calling for an investigation into political interference within the Department of Defense gained surprising momentum. Co-sponsored by moderates and war veterans on both sides of the aisle, the resolution cited a growing concern that loyalty to party is being prioritized over loyalty to Constitution and truth. Even within the military, rumbles of discontent grew louder. A leaked internal memo from the Joint Chiefs revealed concerns that Arctic Command appointments were now being subjected to political vetting before merit assessments, something unprecedented in modern U.S. history. Secretary of Defense Patrick Lindstrom, under scrutiny for signing off on Meyers' dismissal, testified before Congress in a tense hearing broadcast live on national television. Senator Angus King of Maine, whose state has deep interests in Arctic affairs, delivered a scathing line of questioning. Secretary Lindstrom, are we now defining loyalty by how closely a commander praises a politician during a photo op? Or is loyalty still defined by competence, clarity, and truth to the mission? Lindstrom stumbled, sidestepping the question. His non-answer made headlines. Meanwhile, back in Greenland, a new power dynamic was emerging. Inspired by global attention, a coalition of Inuit elders, environmental scientists, and local politicians launched the Greenland Sovereignty and Sustainability Forum, GSSF, an independent body aimed at evaluating all foreign military and commercial involvement on the island. Their first declaration, a full public audit of U.S. military infrastructure and environmental impact at Pituffik Space Base. The announcement rocked the Pentagon. Greenland had never directly challenged U.S. operations before. While Denmark remained the official authority, the growing autonomy movement in Greenland made it clear the days of quiet compliance were over. The UN Arctic Council convened in Reykjavik for a tense summit. American diplomats, now under pressure, tried to reassure allies that the U.S. respected Greenlandic autonomy. But the damage was done. Norway, Canada, and Iceland issued a joint statement calling for restraint and renewed diplomacy. Colonel Meyers, now retired, was invited to speak at the forum in Nuuk. Her address was simple but unforgettable. You don't build trust with threats. You build it with truth. And if that means walking away from a career to tell it, then I will walk proudly. The room erupted into a standing ovation. Her speech resonated across American news networks. Even conservative pundits who once supported Vance's Arctic policy began questioning the wisdom of alienating an ally, destabilizing the military chain of command, and turning a Cold War frontier into a hotbed of rebellion. JD Vance, for his part, doubled down. On the campaign trail, he labeled Meyers a deep state hero, accusing her of undermining national interests and collaborating with foreign powers. But this time, the rhetoric didn't land. The applause he once enjoyed from military families was noticeably fainter. Some walked out. Others held signs that read, "Honor over politics. We stand with the truth." Colonel Meyers equals American patriot. As spring approached and ice began to thaw across Greenland's coastline, something else began to thaw too, the illusion that power alone could shape the future of the Arctic. Backroom Pentagon meetings now included cultural experts and environmental advisors. New diplomatic initiatives were proposed this time, including Greenlandic leaders at every level. Talks began between Denmark and Nuuk about formally redefining Greenland's defense responsibilities. And in a surprising twist, an anonymous source leaked that President Trump himself, while publicly backing Vance, had privately expressed frustration. Why are we in a mess over a lady telling the truth? Fix this quietly. Some say it was a rebuke. Others say it was an acknowledgement of something deeper, that the Arctic, like the truth, doesn't bend easily to force. By summer, the U.S. military had quietly renamed its next polar cooperation program, Operation Northern Harmony. Not a doctrine. Not a flex of might. Just a quiet attempt to rebuild trust. As for Colonel Meyers, she declined job offers from think tanks and media networks. Instead, she moved to a small research station near Nuuk where she volunteers teaching leadership and ethics to young Greenlandic cadets. In her final podcast appearance that year, she left listeners with a single reflection. Truth has a cost, but so does silence. I chose the truth, and I'll live with that. And across both icy shores and sunlit screens, millions of Americans nodded in quiet agreement. Her speech resonated across American news networks. Even conservative pundits who once supported Vance's Arctic policy began questioning the wisdom of alienating an ally, destabilizing the military chain of command, and turning a Cold War frontier into a hotbed of rebellion. JD Vance, for his part, doubled down. On the campaign trail, he labeled Meyers a deep state hero, accusing her of undermining national interests and collaborating with foreign powers. But this time, the rhetoric didn't land. The applause he once enjoyed from military families was noticeably fainter. Some walked out. Others held signs that read, "Honor over politics. We stand with the truth." Colonel Meyers equals American patriot. As spring approached and ice began to thaw across Greenland's coastline, something else began to thaw too, the illusion that power alone could shape the future of the Arctic. Backroom Pentagon meetings now included cultural experts and environmental advisors. New diplomatic initiatives were proposed this time, including Greenlandic leaders at every level. Talks began between Denmark and Nuuk about formally redefining Greenland's defense responsibilities. And in a surprising twist, an anonymous source leaked that President Trump himself, while publicly backing Vance, had privately expressed frustration. Why are we in a mess over a lady telling the truth? Fix this quietly. Some say it was a rebuke. Others say it was an acknowledgement of something deeper, that the Arctic, like the truth, doesn't bend easily to force. By summer, the U.S. military had quietly renamed its next polar cooperation program, Operation Northern Harmony. Not a doctrine. Not a flex of might. Just a quiet attempt to rebuild trust. As for Colonel Meyers, she declined job offers from think tanks and media networks. Instead, she moved to a small research station near Nuuk where she volunteers teaching leadership and ethics to young Greenlandic cadets. In her final podcast appearance that year, she left listeners with a single reflection. Truth has a cost, but so does silence. I chose the truth, and I'll live with that. And across both icy shores and sunlit screens, millions of Americans nodded in quiet agreement.